Right now, the world is in the midst of World War III, but it doesn't feel like it. And that's what I want to talk about today. Why it doesn't feel like it, why this hasn't turned into a global cataclysm similar to what the world experienced in World War I and World War II. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. My name is Joe Palmetto. This is Libertarian Front, where I talk about politics in the United States, but also politics globally. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. I am a political science major from the University of Pittsburgh. I'm also a practicing attorney in Western Pennsylvania. So first, let's lay the scene for the global conflict picture right now. How does it look right now? Well, I think we have to start with Ukraine versus Russia, right? This is the bloodiest, certainly probably the most brutal war that is happening right now in the world. According to some estimates, Russia has over 1 million casualties. I think Ukraine is either at 500,000 or somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million casualties. And these are just staggering numbers for this war, for the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you add up all the combat deaths of the United States in the 20th century, it doesn't match what Russia has lost in this war, what I believe what Russia and Ukraine have lost in this war. And this is a conflict between seemingly just two countries, right? Well, that's the rub. It is not a battle between just two countries. It is a battle between Russia, yes, Ukraine, yes, primary aggressors, but Ukraine is being supported by multiple other countries. In fact, almost an entire continent, right? Pretty much all of Europe outside of Russia is supporting Ukraine with money, with weapons, and with any type of support that they can. And then on the Russian side, Russia is also being supported, likely by China to some degree and in some ways, whether it's just monetarily, whether they're just buying Russian oil. But North Korea has sent 10,000 troops to Russia, and perhaps even more. They've sent artillery shells, likely support that we are not even aware of. And then you have Iran that has been sending drones and military support to Russia since the beginning of this war. And I believe the Russia-Ukrainian war started in 2022, but really it can go all the way back to 2017 when Russia first seized the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. So this is the largest war that is happening right now with massive global implications. And it is, I'm not sure if stalemate is the right word, but it's just a grinding battle with minimal gains on either side at any given time. Although, if you follow the war closely, it appears to me that Ukraine is beginning to gain an edge as they have really rapidly advanced their drone technology, and they are attacking targets relentlessly inside Russia, oil targets, shipping targets, the Russian Navy, the Russian Air Force. And, Russia is moving against Ukraine in a more traditional way, amassing troops on the front line, while Ukraine is just pummeling Russia behind the front lines in order to disrupt civil society. So it's really a brutal war, again, with millions of casualties over the last couple of years and very intense fighting over a large front line. I believe the line in the Donbass area of Ukraine is longer than the demilitarized zone in Korea and North Korea and South Korea. So that is one front, and the most significant front in World War III. And looking at that alone, you could almost make an argument for World War III, but not quite, right? We've seen these sort of proxy wars before, and that is kind of what this is. When the United States was in Vietnam supporting the South Vietnamese, and the Russians and the Chinese were supporting the North Vietnamese. In the Korean War, similar situation with the United States supporting South Korea, and Russia supporting Russia and China supporting North Korea to some extent or in some way. So that's the first large conflict we have. And then we have a couple of other ones. Before I get to the United States versus Iran, though, I want to talk about Venezuela, because this was sort of this next chip that fell, right? The Trump administration, the United States, did sort of a decapitation move in Venezuela where actually, it started a little slower. It started with the United States attacking drug boats that were coming from South America towards the United States. The United States military was blowing up these drug boats. Boom, boom, boom. Then the United States Navy began to put pressure on Venezuela by blockading, by intercepting. And then the decapitation move came, where the United States sent in special forces and essentially kidnapped Nicolas Maduro, brought him to the United States to face trial. And the Trump administration, I think, was emboldened by this move because the new Venezuelan president that came in, which I believe was Maduro's vice president, began to immediately negotiate with the United States and realign in a way that was more friendly towards the United States. So I think the Trump administration was emboldened by this and decided to apply it to other countries. Where did they apply it to? Well, they applied it to Iran and Cuba. In Cuba, there has been a blockade around Cuba for several months now, and it began to put pressure on the Cuban administration, basically an oil embargo, not allowing Cuba to get oil shipments. Although my understanding is Russia has delivered oil to Cuba in order to support it in this time. But you can see the sides that are being created, right? The United States versus Russia. And in many ways, this is just a new instantiation of the Cold War. We're still in a global conflict that looks fairly similar to what it did post World War II. So we have Venezuela, we have Cuba, and then we have the one that's been grabbing most of the headlines in the United States. We have the United States versus Iran. About 4 or 5 months ago, the United States and Israel, another player, began bombing Iran. Now, when I talk about being emboldened, prior to the current war, the United States and Israel had bombed nuclear facilities in Iran. The United States used B-2 bombers. And again, I think the Trump administration was emboldened by this. This was seen as a successful attack. So several months later, the United States and Israel decided to go all out in a similar decapitation move, kind of what they did in Venezuela, right? In Venezuela, the United States didn't kill Nicolas Maduro, but when the bombing and attack on Iran began, it destroyed the Ayatollah Khomeini, who had been in power for over a decade, maybe 2 decades. And most of the leadership structure in Iran was killed, and their air force was relentlessly bombed, their military, and their navy was essentially not completely destroyed, but almost. And so this war was started. Now, there have been negotiations with the United States and Iran, but Iran has continued to fight. And I think one of the reasons Iran has continued to fight is likely because their strategy, well, number one, their defense strategy is actually, I have to give credit where credit's due. It's actually a really good strategy where they use their drones and their missiles to attack American allies in the Middle East, including the UAE, including Saudi Arabia. And that really put a lot of pressure on the United States because these countries, I don't think they like getting bombed. Israel was hitting oil refinery plants in, I believe, the UAE, and attacking water. There's been attacks on water desalination plants. The United States has attacked Iranian water desalination plants, and I think I don't know if Iran has actually done it yet, but they've at least threatened to hit these desalination plants in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And that's a really big deal because there's just not that much fresh water in those countries. And so, in a very, very smart move, the Iranians, in retaliation, attacked United States forces in the Middle East, but also American allies in the Middle East. And it appeared that this war may be short-lived, and it looks like Donald Trump is looking to negotiate a way out of this conflict, right? The midterm elections are coming up in the fall for the United States. I don't think he wants this war going into the midterms, because it's not very popular with the American people. But what I'm trying to tell you here is there's something going on that has a lot of momentum and a lot of power, even beyond just a United States election, right? Like, if this was maybe what was going on in Cuba or Venezuela, or like bombing Syria, which the United States has done, I think the Trump administration could turn that spigot off. But it's much harder to do that with this war in Iran. And it's because we're in a sort of World War III. We're in a global conflict. So I have more on the United States and Iran, but let's talk about the other war that has kind of gone off, and that is Saudi Arabia versus the Houthis. So Saudi Arabia has started bombing the Houthis. The United States and Israel already bombed the Houthis, and the Houthis are a rebel group inside of Yemen that control a significant piece of Yemeni territory. And Saudi Arabia aligned with the United States and Israel, essentially. The United States has been providing military equipment, fighter jets to Saudi Arabia for decades. They've started bombing the Houthis. Where else has this war been seen or expanded to? Well, of course, Israel, with their war on Hamas and the war in Gaza after the October 8th attacks a couple of years ago, where Hamas, attacked Israel, murdered civilians. Israel's been fighting the Hamas sort of nonstop since then, but they've also been attacking the Iranian proxies within Lebanon, which is the terrorist organization of Hezbollah. And my understanding is Israel has also hit the Houthis. So I think we can see two sides here, right? We can see one side, the United States, Ukraine. Maybe Ukraine should be first. You have Ukraine, Western Europe supporting Ukraine, the United States supporting Ukraine. You have Israel, the United States supporting Israel. You have Saudi Arabia and the United States support of Saudi Arabia. You have the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, the Gulf states all on one side. And then you have your other side, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Venezuela, Cuba. And I think playing a role kind of in the background of all of this, maybe trying to stay neutral but cannot be ignored, is China, right? Which is, I would say, the preeminent power beyond the United States in the world. And so you have a series of proxy wars, and you have clear sides supporting their proxies. And in some cases, Russia directly intervening, of course, in Ukraine, United States directly intervening in Iran and in the surrounding areas. So this is World War III, everybody. This is World War III. And, if you think a war like this kind of needs to happen in a cyclical manner, then we're probably right on time, because the last global war was in the 1940s, and then we had one in the 1910s before that. And then you go back, you had the Napoleonic Wars, which were just massively devastating war in Europe at the time, which was at the turn of the 1800s. Of course, somewhere between here, right, World War II and what I'm calling World War III, you have the Cold War, right? But the Cold War was fought through a series of proxy wars. Vietnam, Korea are, of course, the two most well-known, but also in Afghanistan, the United States, right? We're looking at United States versus Russia and Afghanistan. The United States supplied money and weapons to the Afghani insurgents. There were other parts too, right? Algeria, where I'm sorry, not Algeria. I can't remember the name of the country now. Maybe Algeria was a war also where the French fought, but you had Cuba intervening in Africa to support communists. The Cold War had this right capitalist versus communist flavor to it. Whereas this war isn't quite the same. This World War III, I would venture though to characterize it as democracies versus autocracies. Now, the big question here is why hasn't this war turned into, and again, with the casualties in Ukraine and Russia, maybe I'm wrong, but it hasn't turned into quite the same character as World War II, where World War II was this battle to the death, right? Like in World War II, Germany tried to completely destroy Russia and take over the country. Germany took over France and multiple other countries in Europe. And when the United States and Russia fought back, they weren't fighting the Axis powers just to negotiate a deal. These were wars essentially to the death, right? The United States and Russia were accepting nothing less than complete surrender of the Axis powers. And they used every resource that they could to achieve this goal. Let's not forget Japan in the East, where it was also a fight to the death between the United States and Japan. I mean, the United States was preparing to invade the Japanese mainland. The Japanese were arming their citizens, women and children, to fight the United States when the invasion began. And the United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan in order to end this war. So while I believe we're in World War III, it doesn't have quite the same character of World War II yet. The question is why? And the answer to that question is, I think, pretty simple. And maybe I'm stating the obvious here. The answer to that question is nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are very interesting because they're the most destructive force in the world that humans wield. However, they are also, in many ways, the greatest instrument for peace. Now, I'm not advocating for nuclear proliferation, but what I'm telling you is that the presence of nuclear weapons is the reason this current global conflict between Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China to some degree, and the United States, Western Europe, and their Middle Eastern allies. The reason it hasn't turned into a character in nature like World War II, a fight to the death where United States troops are on the ground in Iran, or Russian troops are on the ground in Iran, United States troops in Ukraine. The reason for that is because of the presence of nuclear weapons. And you may say, oh, Joe, maybe that's not the case. Like, I don't think these countries would hesitate to use nuclear weapons. Well, I think the facts show something different because Russia is in this brutal war where they are being attacked over and over by Ukraine. Ukraine even took a piece of Russian territory. They captured Kursk and then sort of gave it back to them. And Russia has not ventured to use nuclear weapons in this war. So nuclear weapons are a massive deterrent, remain a massive deterrent. And they are the reason this war has not gotten even more out of hand than it already is. Because the major sides, Russia, the United States, Western Europe, China, they don't want to see these conflicts turn into nuclear wars. And both sides know if measures were taken beyond these proxy wars, it would turn into a nuclear conflict. And so these wars are going to play out and likely end in ways similar to how North Korea and South Korea ended, how Vietnam ended, where, well, the North Vietnamese just basically won that war. They're going to end in ways that look like those wars. And the reason for that is because of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons have stopped this current World War III between autocracies and democracies from getting even more destructive. Because with the non-nuclear weapons today, it would just be unbelievably bloody if Russia were to invade Western Europe, if Western Europe were to invade Russia, if the United States was to be involved in a ground war in Iran. And there are other variables taking place, right? The United States, for political reasons, probably wouldn't put troops in Iran. However, Russia has not attacked NATO directly. Russia has not used nuclear weapons. And the reason for that is because of nuclear deterrence. So I say again, in a strange way, nuclear, for decades, it's been, let's stop nuclear proliferation. Let's stop nuclear proliferation. And I agree with that largely. But nuclear weapons also have stopped this war from getting out of hand, to the point that in the United States, it's barely in the news. I mean, it's in the news, of course, but it's not grabbing every headline every day like a World War II one would. So I have much more to say on this issue. I hope everybody found this video interesting. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share, and leave in the comments what you would like to hear from me as far as new and additional content. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I'm Joe Palmetto. This is Libertarian Front.